All right, joining me now, senior fellow at Defense Priorities and host of Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube, retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. Always so good to see you. So we just heard from Jessica there. President Trump is saying the U.S. is now renewing its blockade of shipping to and from Iran. Also, that we'll be charging a 20% fee on all goods passing through. What is your take on what is happening there?
Listen, I mean, you can say 20%, you can say 90%, 100%. It's not going to make any difference because nothing's going to pass through. I got to say, this is really strange to be hearing out of the White House as though this is just an action we can choose to take. We cannot just administer the Strait of Hormuz or take it over. If we could have done that, we would never have stopped after the first 40 days. We would have simply continued on until we had control of it. And then we had the blockade. If we could have done it then, we would have. But the idea that we're going to go and control and administer the Strait of Hormuz is just not reality. Well, I mean, with what assets? What would we possibly do? How would we do that? How would we negate all of the defenses that the Iranian side already has, which is why it's still under their control today? So he can say whatever he wants, but until that radically changes on the ground in terms of what's happening in the region, it's going to remain just sound bites. But by adding putting the blockade back up, that's not helping our side, because that means that nobody's oil is getting out, whether Iranian or GCC countries, and that is bad for the global supply, and that's bad for our own economy. President Trump himself on 16th of June or 17th of June, when he announced the signing of the MOU, said, well, he had to because our strategic petroleum reserve had about 4 weeks left, and he didn't want to be responsible to be the next Hoover, to have a depression on his watch, et cetera. And now one wonders, did he forget about those things? Because all of those are still in effect, and we're now much less than 4 weeks away before the SPR gets into a dangerous territory. So I don't know how this helps us at all, because it's definitely not going to compel the Iranian side to give up now when they haven't since February 28th.
All right, Colonel, so let's zoom out a bit. So U.S. allies in the Persian Gulf report new attacks today by Iran. The U.S. is saying it hit dozens of Iranian targets. The ceasefire certainly appears to be dead. Where do things stand right now from your perspective when it comes to the actual war? Is this war now back on?
Well, the ceasefire is dead, not by my observation, but by President Trump's declaration. He said a few days ago that the ceasefire is over. He said it numerous times in multiple discussions. So now then we can't complain if the Iranian side uses force, and they can't complain if we use force, because basically the ceasefire is over, or not basically, but directly. So where do we go from here? The Iranian side has said, and from one source I talked to just this morning, they said until you go back and take off the energy sanctions, which we took off and then put back on, release the frozen funds, which we have never done, and force Israel to withdraw from Lebanon, we won't even have a discussion. We won't even meet to talk about anything, meaning the nuclear negotiations won't even be discussed. So that is a really, really high bar. And by President Trump, after they said that, going back and putting on this blockade means that there are no talks now or for the foreseeable future, but that SPR problem and that global oil and gas supply problem is going to start piling up.
All right, so in recent days, Iranian officials and clerics are escalating threats against President Trump to avenge the killing of their supreme leader. We saw what happened last week when the president switched Air Force One planes on his return trip from the NATO summit. Do you think the president's threat level from Iran has increased, and what does that mean going forward?
Well, listen, there's no question that the threat level is higher. I mean, and this is one of the things that I was just anguished about when this first happened on the 28th of February. When you start assassinating a lot of people in another country, you're going to potentially be a return target, because, I mean, just look how really upset a lot of people are at this alleged intelligence from the Israeli side. Although you don't need any intelligence, you can just look at the signs during this whole funeral procession on the Iranian side, and they were demanding revenge, and they called out all kinds of awful things about President Trump. So it's not an empty threat. It's something they need to take, the Secret Service needs to take very, very seriously, because the implications could be enormous for that. But you can't undo what happened in the future. So now the best we can do is just make sure his security is really airtight so none of this stuff happens.
All right, last question for you. President Trump, as you know, has said many times the U.S. has essentially obliterated Iran's military capacity. We are now months into this conflict. How badly damaged do you think Iran's capabilities actually are?
I think the only thing we can say is that we covered over the facilities. We hit their surface level facilities, things that were on the surface, and we blocked up a lot of the passageways to get it. But every expert that I have talked to said that these facilities are so far underground, under granite, where the rock formations are at different angles, so it's virtually impossible for any kind of a missile, even these bunker busters that we have, to actually penetrate. So in all probability, the facilities are all untouched underneath the ground. The issue for us is there are other facilities that we didn't attack, and because the Iranians said, okay, forget about the IAEA inspectors after 2025, we don't have any idea what's going on anywhere else. Last week, the Iranians said, hey, listen, if you guys keep attacking us, we may withdraw from the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and we may reassess our nuclear doctrine at that time. So they're given a barely veiled warning that if this continues on, we may push them into the direction we said we don't want to push them in the beginning. So cutting off the discussions and the negotiations here is probably not a good thing if we actually want to prevent them from developing a nuclear weapon.
Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you.
Thank you.